Hello, everybody. I'm Vernā Myers, and I am so excited to welcome you to this episode of Sundays with Vernā. We have a wonderful guest with us, Jason G. Greene.
Hey, Vernā.
Hi. And look, I have to read the bio so that you know who you're talking to and listening to.
This is my least favorite part, you know?
I know, but it must be done, okay? You worked hard for these things. So let me tell you a little bit about Jason. He is a Maryland-born, community organizer, attorney, storyteller, and entrepreneur. Greene served as special assistant to the president and associate White House counsel to President Obama, advising on economic and domestic policy matters. Greene also co-founded SkillSmart, a company that reshapes how communities measure economic impact, and is CEO of Evergreen Labs, where he supports visionary organizations working to expand economic opportunity and strengthen community. Greene serves as a trustee to the Pleasant View Historic Association and supports its efforts to preserve the historic site. His award-winning documentary, Finding Fellowship, explores the rich history of Quince Orchard and the fight to preserve its legacy. A graduate of Washington University, St. Louis, and Yale Law School, Greene remains rooted in the work of truth and justice, investing in stories that remind us of who we are. He currently spends time between Maryland and Dallas, Texas, with his wife, Ritu, and his son, Aiden. Welcome to Sundays with Vernā.
You did not have to do all that, but I'm so glad to be with you. Thank you for having me, Vernā. It's a pleasure.
I am thrilled to meet you in person. This is only our second.
We've met on the spiritual plane.
I know, we have. Absolutely. When I was reading your new book, so that is mostly what we're here to talk about. But we have also been doing a lot in this podcast talking about transition and transformation, right? That line where something has to change. Yeah. Sometimes it's voluntary, like it was in your situation, and sometimes involuntarily, we learn that we are moving in another direction.
Yes. And
that direction can be incredibly amazing once we get there. But there is that messy middle. So I am welcoming you to talk about that with our viewers and listeners as well. But let's start with this beautiful book here, Too Precious to Lose. I love the cover, and I love the idea behind this whole book. It is a memoir of family, community, and possibility. And it came out this year, just in the nick of time, as we celebrate the 250th anniversary of our country. And so I really wanted to hear from you after writing this book and putting it out this year, right around this same time where people are thinking back and looking at their history, how your own personal family history either dovetails or departs or collides with the history of our country.
First, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to sit next to you and get to have some of these conversations. I look forward to digging in on that transition conversation.
Yes.
There's another project that's in the back of my mind that aligns with that, so we can talk a little bit more about that. And thank you for pointing out the cover. So Too Precious to Lose. So these two streets are the intersection of where I grew up. So this is Quince Orchard Road.
Yes.
And then this is Fellowship Lane, the street that my family named for the camaraderie that existed on that street when I was born there. So this dirt road, looking like it was moons and moons and moons ago, that's when I was born on it, in sort of a testament to policy and some other things that were going on in Montgomery County,
Yeah,
Maryland.
I really do love this.
Oh, thank you.
And, we're talking about transition, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly. And that's
yeah,
part of it. I mean, if you go there now, you wouldn't recognize this. You wouldn't believe that this was once a single lane dirt road with shrubs overgrowing it, right? So when you think about this history point that you're making in this moment as America is trying to tell a story about itself,
yeah,
what I think what's really important is that we still tell a whole story about ourselves. And right now we're at a moment where, history is trying to be erased, forgotten, overlooked, and intentionally removed.
yeah.
And it's hard enough, right? If you think about the way in which we're taught history, we're only taught history in these sort of iconic blips, these moments. And so when I got to go back and really sit and understand my family's story and where it intersects and collides with America's history, it was really interesting.
What was also really interesting as an African American is to hear about what your family built.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they built their own houses, and they built their own schools, and they built their own churches. And partly it's because, they are creative, imaginative. And part of it is you're explaining that there was no one else that would be willing to do that.
Right.
And it made me think, just your comments made me think about taking U.S. history at Barnard when I went to college. Yeah. Actually, we could also go to Columbia. So it was actually a Columbia class. And right when you could drop classes, I just had to drop it because I was like, the history has got to be more than we were slaves.
Right. Right.
And then we were protesting.
Right. Yep. You go from enslavement to the civil rights movement, right? Like what happened in this period? Yeah.
Right. And so at some point I just could not, and in fact, raised my hand. I was like, yeah, what were people doing? There was no Harlem Renaissance described. There was nothing about these kinds of stories that you're telling in this book. And so, nobody can tell the whole story of the U.S., but it's so important that we have authors like you who are talking about their lived history.
Yes, and wanted to fill in those gaps. Partly inspired by Brian Stevenson and his work with the Equal Justice Initiative, right? He's trying to give life and context to the Reconstruction era, a period that's completely left out of history books.
Yes.
And I also wanted to give voice and illustration to this rural Black experience.
Yes.
And so my family is kind of the last generation. Well, I'm right on the cusp. My dad grew up working his father's farm. By the time I came along, the Quince Orchard community, which is now Gaithersburg, which is now North Potomac, right?
Yeah.
It had started to evolve into suburbia, but I got to watch my grandfather ride on his tractor, right? Our house was next door to his pig farm and his cows.
Yes, the
and
pig.
So it's a unique experience that's so representative. You said I was Maryland born. People don't know that Montgomery County, transitioning from that period in the 1860s to the turn of the century, it's like a third of the population was Black folk.
Yes.
People are like, oh, there aren't Black people in Montgomery County. I'm like, there were.
Yes, exactly.
And here's some of the stories of what it looked like coming out of that period of time for free Black communities to form, the way in which they invested in community and education and their faith.
Yes.
Right? Like that's a testament to people, right? And that's an important part of the history.
And for those of us who kind of live in this area, we're talking about what a lot of people call Gaithersburg and places like that, right? And so when you go by it on the highway and you see all the fancy stores and the things that they've built, you're not thinking about the story that you tell. And so it's so powerful
all
for
of your
that
people
reason.
to get on 270 North, right? And it's so funny, Vernā, because people now that have read the book or watched the documentary, they'll text me and be like, I saw Quince Orchard on the exit sign, on 270 North. And so trying to really put this Quince Orchard community in people's vernacular and in their minds. But you're right. You wouldn't know that there was a rural Black community when you're driving through Gaithersburg or North Potomac or up on 270 North now.
And you actually make several references as to how many times they're that area has been renamed, right? The upscale name, right? But then what happens when we rename things is that we also lose things. And the name of your book, Too Precious to Lose, what are you referring to?
Well, I want people to have an opportunity to sit with that themselves, right? We're going around the country right now having a lot of conversations with communities, and that's one of the things I'll ask audiences is, what's too precious for you? I had the good fortune, and we'll talk a little bit about this, to go and sit with my grandmother, and certainly my grandmother and our relationship and her stories and values, too precious to lose. But one of the things that she also showed me was how my ancestors, including her, invested and built community in very difficult times with incredibly limited resources. And that idea that we can build something better and can commit ourselves to that, I think that is too precious to lose. And so there's a number of things when you read this book, tentacles that I want to draw out for people to see that these are too precious to lose. I think the big takeaway, though, Vernā, is that once we do that internal analysis to identify what's too precious to lose, the book is really asking, then what are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice to make sure that those things that are too precious to lose are actually preserved?
In the book, what is interesting is you're learning about that and how before you went to sit with your grandma, you thought, grandma's not doing well.
Right.
I'll take leave from my very important job in DC and I'll go and say hi.
Right.
Spend a little time.
Bless her with my presence for a minute and get back to work.
Yeah. And that actually, something shifted. Something changed. Something called you to do it differently. And I don't know, did it take you by surprise? Like, what did you think you were doing? And what caused you to shift into a different investment at this time?
Well, so just to set the stage for that, so folks understand, I was the job that you're referencing, I was 4.5 years into being Associate White House Counsel to President Obama. And all I had ever wanted to do growing up was to make people's lives better. I wanted to do something important. I couldn't name what that was. And I thought working at the White House, right, for the first Black president in the counsel's office was doing something important. But the reality is, though, in doing that important work, I had sort of over-calibrated. And I hadn't been home. I was relatively disconnected from my family. Not in any formal way, just in a busy way, just in a they'll understand way, and just I'll get to that later way, And so I got this call from my mother that my grandmother's sick and in the hospital, right? So that's how I get back into this space. And part of what shook me was that I walked into that space and was transported back in time. I realized that it wasn't my first time in that space. My grandmother used to take me there when I was a child. So at 5 years old. This is Asbury.
Yeah.
So Asbury Methodist Village, which has like all these different components. I used kind of hospital as shorthand, but it was an elder care facility. It was a hospice facility. And so most of the people where my grandmother was didn't come out.
And the fact that you almost have to revisit these spaces to even remember why they're important and what your relationship to them is, because we get so busy. And, for the most part, our family's very proud of us. I mean, you're
cheering us on.
Yeah.
Cheering us on.
Keep it going.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely.
But then there is also that you never come home.
You don't come home. Well, I mean, one of the crazy things, so I'm sitting with my grandmother and I start to hear these stories and I'm moved by them. And I go to my older sister, my Keisha Davis, Dr. Keisha Davis, I should say, who is.
Are both your sisters doctors?
Both my sisters are doctors, which my mother reminds me at my Yale Law School graduation. My mother's in the back. His sister's a doctor.
What?
Ma, come on, focus. So I go to my sister and I'm like, Grandma's got all these stories. Did you know these stories? And my sister says,
duh.
Yeah. How didn't you?
Where have you been?
Mm-hmm. Right? Like she had made time and gone and heard all the tales, and I had been running around doing every other thing that I wanted to do. And so that kind of, hit home a little bit, that how important it is to make time.
Yeah.
And so I encourage people to the point you were just making, like life is fast. And if we allow it, it'll just zip right by. And I think we've also, and I'm certainly guilty of this, I was measuring my success on a daily basis by how busy I was, how stretched I was.
I thought it's interesting, exactly, how busy, how stretched, but I thought you might say measuring it by how far.
Oh, yeah. I got.
And the
Away.
far
Yeah.
is a distance
Yeah.
from where you began.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I remember moving back here from Boston to Baltimore, and I was staying on the water, which is something as a kid I always wanted to do. I was like, who are those people who live on the harbor, right? And then all of a sudden I'm that
You're one
person.
of them, right?
And a girlfriend came to visit me, and we were sitting on the balcony, the gorgeous terrace, and she says, how far is this from where you grew up? And I said, oh, not very far. It's maybe like 5 miles. I was on West Side, whatever. She goes, no, I mean, how far is it? And I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. So there, when we're going back, we're also like, we're
always measuring,
collapsing time, and also thinking about what it means. And I always find that going home has surprises. What surprised you?
I mean, everything.
Yeah.
When I got to go back, I mean, one, I'm deeply fortunate that my grandmother was sort of armed and willing to tell the stories, right? I thought that maybe I had missed my opportunity. But in fact, my grandmother was really prepared, and not to spoil. I want your listeners and viewers to read the book.
Yes.
Not to spoil it, but that I got more time than I expected with my grandmother. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
That we got to spend real time together, where I was able to really slow down and appreciate. And so I was surprised to learn kind of my family's quote unquote origin story, right? Or a part of it.
Yes.
It's not the origin, but I didn't know, we were fortunate to know the names, right? My great grandparents, we always knew the names in the story that was told. Great-great-grandpa Gary was an aspiring carpenter in Montgomery County. And one day he met a homemaker, Matilda Greene. And together they had 15 children in the Quince Orchard area. You're like, but this was in the 1840s. Like, that doesn't add up. And so you wonder kind of their origins and where does that begin? And we didn't have that story. And so I thought that there would be some sort of slave component story to our family story. Maybe it would be Montgomery, Alabama.
Yes.
Maybe I didn't expect it to be Montgomery County, Maryland, right? So to uncover those kinds of truths about our family history, so those components, understand what our family was involved in building, right? Despite the realities of enslavement, upon emancipation, like committing to building a community, right? Pooling together $54 to buy 3 acres of land to build the schoolhouse, the church, the cemetery, social hall, right? Like that blew me away.
Yes.
I don't know that that's what I would have been doing after emancipation, right? In the same place where I was once enslaved, but to make sure that my children had a public education and make sure that there was a place to commune with my God, right? Like,
what we're seeing is all these people coming out with storytelling about African-American history, things I have to admit I did not know. And so you're like reading these snippets and you're getting all this stuff on Insta and on Facebook, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's just so much to a people and so much to the folks who they actually went through history with. Yes. So there's still a lot. But here's the thing.
Yes.
You did make history. You were the first person in your family to work for the first Black president. And you decide to leave.
I was wondering where you're going.
You decide to leave. And I want you to share a piece of the book with folks, because this is the moment where apparently if you're a staffer and you're leaving, you get to bring your family to say goodbye, I guess, to meet the president, right? As a family, which I think is such a sweet thing. And then you get a photograph, right? So you decide, you haven't quite announced what's happening after you leave, but you're leaving. How did Grandma feel about this?
Well, let me read this part because
read it.
it'll answer
Okay.
that question.
Okay.
So this is
Okay.
the part of the book that Vernā just teed up. Other families were already waiting in line, but we were first on the schedule. Everyone remarked how large our group was and made space as more family members continued to process through the door. As we paced the waiting room, I could see my 5-year-old nephew Spencer starting to get rambunctious. I called him over to me and said, "I need you to be on your best behavior today, bud. Okay? Mommy said that we're going to meet your boss today. Is that true?" "Yeah, bud, that's true." "But where are we?" he squealed. I squatted down to his level. "We're at the White House." "You know I work at the White House." Spencer had been to more Easter egg rolls than I care to admit. Yet he had more questions. "Does President Obama work at the White House?" he asked as the corners of his mouth started turning up. "Yes." "Is President Obama your boss?" "Yes, he is." I could see his little mind working the syllogism to ask the next and most important question. "Are we going to meet President Obama?" "Yeah, bud, we are." He paused, taking in my answer. Without me even having to press him, he assured me, "I'll be good." And he sat right down in the chair. And then it was time to go in. Guiding the group into the outer oval area, I exchanged greetings with President Obama and introduced him to the members of my family. "Mr. President, please meet my mother, Miss Rita Greene, my father, Reverend Gerard Greene, and my grandmother, Miss Ida Pearl Greene, who is 95 years young." Grandma was looking up from her wheelchair, and her face radiated with joy as the first black president reached to shake her hand. Determined to stand out of respect, she tried to rise out of her wheelchair. President Obama assured her she didn't need to get up just for him, and for a hilarious few seconds, they were in a push of war, Grandma attempting to stand, while President Obama gently pushing her back into the chair until she finally relented. Next, the president scooped up my 2-year-old nephew, Byron, into his arms. Witnessing Spencer and Byron marvel at his presence made us all choke up. Their hopeful, innocent little black boy eyes seemed to grasp the significance of the moment. And as the entire family filed into the Oval Office, I gave the quick stats of my starting team. This is my sister Keisha. She's a family physician. My other sister Maya is finishing up her medical residency. The president looked over at my parents and said, "I don't know what y'all are serving over at the Greene household, but can I get some?" Mom and Dad blushed. A minister for most of my life, my father had always found the right words, regardless of the occasion, whether to inspire me on my darkest day, celebrate the union between two beloveds, or send a loved one to the hereafter. Words came natural to him. But this time, glowing with pride, Dad extended his hand to the president and simply said, "Thank you." The president accepted my father's gratitude and turned to the rest of the family for pictures. Pete Souza, the president's photographer, efficiently organized us in front of the resolute desk with the Emancipation Proclamation hanging over the Martin Luther King bust and did his magic. Glancing over at Dad, I sensed his disappointment. This man of many words had only managed to utter 2 to the leader of the free world. Following the photo session, the president positioned himself to shake hands and say thank you to each of my family members as they departed. As he said goodbye to my father, the president said, "Thank you, Reverend Greene." "Thank you, Mr. President," the Rev managed, this time as he shook President Obama's hand. But it seemed that Dad still wasn't entirely satisfied with himself. Perhaps he had crafted a blessing or a prayer to share with the president, something to shield him from both known and unknown adversaries, a message to maintain the faith. Observing my father and the president shake hands reminded me of what had drawn me to the president in the first place. When I sat in Boston in 2004, younger Barack Obama roused the crowd with his message of community, hope, prosperity, and reminded me of a younger Gerard Greene, who would evoke emotion in his congregants by imploring that they were all part of a single human fabric and capable of far more together than apart. My dad's simple thank you to the president was really thanking him for taking the baton of hope to the next level. And to me, it conveyed all the sentiment, faith, and vision that any prayer could have given. It was clear to me that he had found exactly the right words. Greenes, thank you for lending us Jason. He's been a valuable member of the team, and we know he's going to go on to do great things at... Wait, Jason, remind me where you're going. I hadn't planned for this awkward moment. We'd gone to great pains to not tell my grandmother I was leaving the White House. She just wouldn't have allowed it. She was always under the impression that the doctors were wrong and that she would leave Asbury. So when the president asked, I couldn't say, to my grandmother's room. Instead, I said, oh, I'm just going to go take a little time off. This answer disappointed both Grandma and the president. My grandmother, who at 95 years old still worked as an Avon lady, even from Asbury, had rarely, if ever, taken a day off. She looked at me with a scowl. President Obama said what she must have been thinking. Some time off? Time off? I want time off. I smiled sheepishly, thanked him again, and quickly shooed the family out of the Oval Office. Once we got Grandma out of earshot, I doubled back to tell the president I was actually going to spend time with her, as he had done on the campaign with his own grandmother. He exhaled a sigh of relief. We shared one last bro hug. I savored that. After working for him for 6 years between the campaign and the White House, it was time for me to figure out who I was without Barack Obama behind me and to find my own way forward.
It's beautiful. One of the many things you learn is about these coming together.
Right. Well, yeah.
Of these three churches.
I can't believe we haven't talked about that.
I know. I know there's so much to talk about, right? Two of which were white congregations. Right. So will you tell us a little bit about how that all came to be, including what happens on the night that they make a decision?
So in this little community at Quince Orchard, you had 3 Methodist churches, in and of itself crazy. They were all like a mile apart.
Right.
Black Methodist congregation. Then you had 2 white Methodist congregations, but because the Methodist Church had split over the issue of slavery in the 1840s, you had a Northern Methodist and a Southern Methodist. So they had their own issues, right? So it's just kind of wild that this all existed. Quince Orchard's going through, as rural communities did at the time, was going through a big shift. They were telling, we have this generational cycles, right? Farming community, now they're telling everybody, get off the farm. We don't want you to be like us. We want you to be better. Go get your professional jobs. Go move to D.C. Go move to Baltimore.
Yes.
Well, then they didn't have the population to sustain them. All the kids moved off the farm. And so each of these 3 rural community churches, these were all mission churches, right? The big city was Gaithersburg. And Gaithersburg had sent off these mission pastors to build a little congregation in the country. And so each of these 3 churches had the same plight economically. And so they're like, we got to figure this out. So they had the wherewithal to recognize that they were at an existential moment, right? That these churches couldn't be able to continue in the manner that they had. So in true Black church fashion, the Methodist congregation, Pleasant View, they gathered themselves into one room and said, we got to figure this out. What are we going to do? We got to have a vote. And so you had a faction that said we should merge with the Black church on the other side of Gaithersburg. You had the faction that said we should merge with these 2 white congregations that are, they're northern and they're southern white folk, but they're farmers like us, and their lifestyle is very familiar, and we see them at the drugstore. So there was that, and there was a population that truly believed that you didn't need to merge with anyone. That, like, as a faithful people, if we continued to go in the way that we were, that God would provide. And so this population is gathered in a 100-year-old building, trying to figure this out, and emotions are high, right? Fractures of family. My grandparents had differences of opinion on what they should do. And so as this debate is raging, literally, Renee, the knock comes at the door and word is delivered that Dr. King has been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, as I'm hearing this story from my grandmother, I'm like, oh, well, that's that, right? As cities erupted and riots burned, right? This congregation decided that they were going to merge with 2 other congregations. In September of 1968, those 3 racially segregated churches had their last segregated service. And amazingly, they did all these remarkably intentional things to give that integrated congregation a chance at survival. They bought new land So it wasn't on any of the 3 existing properties. They built a new church, took on a new name, and then had to figure out how to bind up these different histories and identities, and like, what was the preaching style? What was this? Which hymnal? Which songbook? How
This is
long
a
was service
true
going to be?
experiment.
Right?
This
Truly
is
an experiment.
true.
Truly an
Yeah.
experiment. And it floored me to hear my grandmother, who played a really significant role in trying to, foment that church decision when her husband thought this is not the path that we should be going on, that to have her faith in God, but also in each other, to choose that in 1968, given all that was happening in the world.
It really does speak to what is possible when people decide that they want to make it possible.
Yeah.
You talk about how your father and his brother, so your uncle,
his cousin,
okay, grew up going to the same school in the same classrooms, right? But had a very different perception about integration, about discrimination, based on their own experiences. Can you tell us a little bit about what was different and why that shaped how they thought about what was possible?
Yeah, I thought that my dad and my cousin Melvin's stories, I thought that this would be, as a social scientist, right? A political scientist, I was like, oh, here, these are a wonderful sample set. You had 2 Black men, the exact same age, grew up on the same street, same school, same family, both juniors, like whatever you need, right?
Yeah.
All of the perfect sample set. And they should have a very similar experience through integration. And turns out that they did not, right? Melvin could recount to me the day in such detail that he was called the N-word when they both integrated their elementary school. They were in the same class that integrated their elementary school. And Melvin had this experience that he could articulate of being called the N-word. And if you ask my dad about his experiences, he would say, oh, nothing bad ever happened, right? And so because he never had a bad experience, when it was this opportunity to sort of advocate for these church merges, he's like, yeah, I think this is something worth pursuing. This is kind of cultural. This is experiences. I've had positive experiences. What I had known about Melvin growing up had been really isolated to one fact. And that was when it was time to make a choice in 1968, he was one of the people who chose to vote against merging.
There's so many stories in each story. You're looking at the same set of circumstances, so to speak, but there's so many individual stories within that. And I think that's where we miss it. And you talk about specifically a shift that happened in you when you were working on this project and George Floyd was killed. Tell me what Floyd's murder did within you as you thought about how you perceive things.
Yeah, I think this goes back to just the slowing things down a little bit, the significance of our time. I had been the inheritor of a community decision. We talked about that, right? My grandmother, other men and women, made a radical choice in 1968 to choose community. And then I grew up in that church. I was baptized there. I grew up there. And so I was the recipient of it. Never really had to think about it being created or kept, right? And I became then an acolyte of it, right? I would proselytize this idea of community that my ancestors did in 1968. And so I went to Washington University in St. Louis because there was a dean there that said that this is a place where you'll be known by name and by story. That reminded me a lot of Fairhaven. And then I went off to try and elect Barack Obama because he promised me that there would be no red states and no blue states, right? I was moved by that. I believed in that idea of community. And then with George Floyd's murder, and the reality is, of course, George Floyd wasn't the first person killed, and sadly not the last person killed police brutality at the hands of hate. But it was the first time I couldn't sort of busy myself away from it. It made me angry. And I didn't want to be the angry Black man. I thought that trope, would pull us asunder. What I realized, though, is that they were angry. They're very angry. They just built communities with their anger. They put kids through college with their anger. And they merge churches with their anger. And that helped me realize that like I had been cutting off a natural human emotion. I hadn't been fully me. So I had to be fully me, and I had to channel all of my emotion in a direction that I think would move my cause forward.
I think a lot of people can identify with you. I think that anger is something that is potent, and you got to figure out how to use it
because it can overcome you.
because it can overcome you. It's one of those emotions that if you haven't figured out, like you said, how to channel it, it will channel you.
Yeah.
And it is not always in the best way, but that energy, that passion, it's still a form of passion.
It's a passion.
And
That's
then learn using that passion to co-create and to imagine and to explore. And you do this with young people. So can you tell me a little bit about how young people, featured in this project, but also what's your perception of young folks these days? Sometimes they get a real bad rap.
Such a bad rap.
I know. And I'm like, come on, y'all. They are our future. Come on,
Such a bad rap.
let's
but
invest here.
So I think that's right. The word has to be invest. I think that we only will get out, right? You want to return, invest. And I love that you brought up young people. It's, I think, probably one of the most rewarding parts of this process for me, getting to work with the young students. None of this was by design, I should say, right? Because some people are like, all right, I want to capture my family's
your
story.
Design.
Amen.
There was apparently a design,
yes,
and you got in with it.
Yes, I got in the river and I flowed in the river.
Exactly.
As my friend Tony Waller would say, I didn't fight the river. I was in the flow. But it wasn't by my design. I didn't go into my grandmother's Asbury room thinking about writing a book or trying to make a documentary or any of that. I thought that we were going to have a couple of sessions, spend some time with her, and I get on back to the White House, right? And so one of the things that happened is I learned some things from my grandmother. And then I wanted to share those things with some others. And so I was given a talk at my high school, and I told folks about Quince Orchard. And I said, people fought for Quince Orchard to be named what it is. There was once a colored school named Quince Orchard that this high school is named after. Did you guys know that? And some kids came up to me afterwards like, we didn't know that. That's really cool. We want to be a part of that history. How do we preserve that history? How do we help you preserve that history? Well, Vernā, I was not ready for that. I was just spouting off, right? And I said, oh, well, maybe you guys can help me write a book. And they're like, no, we don't want to write a book. That sounds like a terrible idea. Like, why would you ever write it? No. And one of them said, maybe we can make a documentary. Maybe we could make a film is what he said. And thinking that they would lose interest, this was like the spring. They were going to go away for the summer. I wouldn't hear from them again. In the fall, they called me, said, Mr. Greene, we've got 20 kids who want to be a part of this Quince Orchard project. A lot of them weren't necessarily born there. They certainly weren't like generationally connected to the place, but they chose it. They chose to be there. They chose to preserve that history. They chose to make that community theirs. And I think that's really a powerful part of this too, is making spaces for people to fit into the story.
What a great point. I mean, and to know that you don't have to be from a particular place to appreciate it, to feel close to it, to actually dig in and find your connection with it. I think that's very powerful because people do often feel, and sometimes because people have made them feel.
Yes. How long you been here? Exactly.
Right.
Where'd you go to high school?
Exactly. But I think that a lot of young people bring so much curiosity and so much enthusiasm for connectivity.
Yeah.
Because that's what you also gave them.
Yes.
In our society now, we feel so detached, so isolated, so not part of a fellowship. And I just wanted to know, as we're getting ready to close, like, do you feel more or less hopeful in this moment that we are facing? What's your hope about racial reconciliation in our country at the time, in a time where it feels like there are certain people who are just creating more and more dissension, more and more more and more lies, let's call it what it is, that serve to further divide us. What's your take after having this beautiful opportunity? It had its ups and downs. We want to say that.
Yeah.
But how you feeling as we face our 250th year anniversary in this country?
I think I'm a natural optimist. I default to hopeful. I think that's the product of being coming from a Methodist preacher and a little public school teacher and a radical grandmother, raised on fellowship. Right, I didn't have much chance in this. But I think I also there is sort of there are examples um, of hope, and part of it is I've been traveling around the country. I've been moved because there is this same feeling that you're talking about, right? This feeling of polarization, this feeling of distrust. Like that's clear, we know it. We're obviously in this epidemic of loneliness that's afflicting young people, and yet people come out, right? I would sit in rooms where people would raise their hands in this frustration. The real issue is what do we do about it? And helping people see that there is intentional distrust, that people are sowing seeds of discord because it enriches them, because the chaos gives clicks, because the chaos rewards them, because the chaos suppresses people, because there's power in this unity. When people start to realize that this is by design, that the chaos forces us to withdraw, to retreat to our own corners, right? To to not check in on people, to disregard the connection because I won't call you because I know you wouldn't call me, right? Like that's just not true. It's just the stories that we tell in our head. And once people see that that's by design, and that the opposite of chaos is not control, it's connection, right? It's community. Like we can actually um, begin to fight back. But this is the piece I think people often forget. We talk about these ideas of community and love, and people are like, "Oh, it's ephemeral and nice." But like love looks like accountability. Love looks like planning. Love looks like work. Love looks like intention. Love looks like dedication.
The other thing that I see you doing and know how important it is the preserving the history, because often that's where the strength comes
Yes.
from,
Yeah.
right? And if it's wiped out, we don't actually know how people got
That's our
to.
foundation.
Right, it's our foundation. So, you've got a lot of other projects going on. Do you want to share with us and what you're most excited about right now? I mean, obviously you're speaking around the book, but
Yeah.
you've got a number of other things that you have founded and are directing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. All of my work is under the guise of trying to build stronger, resilient, respectful, dignified communities. That's I think we're always trying to complete our parents' work or the work of our childhood. That I was made to feel like I didn't belong at a young age. And I think I've been trying to create spaces of belonging my entire life. And so I've had the great fortune to get to do that work with a couple of different hats. Right, I got to do it as a policy person in the White House. I got to do it as an entrepreneur through the company SkillSmart that I founded, which is all about helping ensure that people have dignified pathways to quality work. I got to do it as a venture capitalist, as a documentary filmmaker, now as an author. I have another documentary that I'm in pre-production on. It's called Making Your Mark. It's about the history of the signature, Renee, and the role that the signature has played in empowerment and in disenfranchisement.
Ooh,
So
interesting
we're
take.
doing this this project, and then I have another project that is just in the back of my mind that I've been sketching out, which is called Leaving, and so aligned with your work, thinking about transitions and transformations, and how we know when to leave, and the power that leaving can provide both to the individual and to the organization. And so,
well, we got to stay in touch.
yes, we'll
We've
stay in touch
definitely got to stay in touch.
for sure.
I want to thank you for coming by Sundays with Vernā and spending time with us. It is Just a joy to hear your stories, and everyone get the book. It's awesome. Um, and I always feel like memoirs are such a gift because we may not actually want to tell all the stories, but it how else are we going to actually know each other in a more complex and loving way, often until we hear a much more complex story. All the stories are so minimal and reductive and so forth. That's not what this is. And as a result, we find connections in so many different places, especially places we wouldn't expect. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us and celebrating your family at the same time that we're celebrating the family in our country. And may we all find the unity, the community, and love that we need in order to make this experiment of our country a success.
Amen, Vernā. Thank you so much for having me. And I love that frame. We have to be reminded that we're in the middle of an experiment.
Yeah.
And so these experiments require increased intention and dedication.
Yes.
None of this, one of the biggest lessons for me with Fairhaven is to understand that nothing that is intentionally created will be kept unless it's intentionally kept, right? And so if we want
really
these
important
pieces, how do we actually pull them forward? So thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure to be with you and get to cheerlead and celebrate all of your work.
Jason G. Greene, folks. I'm so excited to invite you to follow us and to catch up with all of our conversations. We're on anywhere you can find your podcast. We are there at Sundays with Vernā. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Insta at Vernā Myers, and also find our website, vernamyers.com, where you can keep in touch with all that we are doing. See you there.